Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time out of your day to join us for our ISO 14001 2015 update webinar. My name is Scott Jones. I'm the EHS Program Manager here at Perry Johnson Registrars. I handle our ISO 14001, OSAS 18001, R2, which is the Responsible Recycling Standard, as well as the RIO standard. So today we're going to talk about a lot of the time frames and transition periods for the new revised 14001. We're going to get into some of the key changes to the standard. We're not going to go too in-depth into the changes of the requirements of each provision or chapter of the standard, but we will go into some of the, we'll highlight some of the key changes for you. Kind of give you an idea of what the new standard looks like, what the aim for the new standard is and what they're trying to achieve with it, and hopefully help you, set your mind at ease a little bit and realize that the changes really aren't that drastic. It's not that extensive, and it won't be that difficult to transition, hopefully. So with that, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the question box over there on the panel. I'll answer all the questions at the end. We'll have a question and answer session for about 15 or 20 minutes so that everybody has a chance to answer all their, any questions that you may have on whether it's the certification portion of it, the requirements of the standard, or whatever it may be. So if you have a question that's more specific to your organization, you'd like a little bit more detailed response, you can always email me or give me a call and we can chat about it after the webinar. So, and I'll have my contact information up at the end of this presentation. So with that, we'll get going here. So if you're unfamiliar with PJR, we are one of the larger registrars throughout the world. We certify companies to a variety of different standards to countries all over the world. We have offices in Italy and India, in China and Japan, as well as Latin America. So we do our best to make sure that we can service your needs wherever you're located. We also have, if we don't have offices in some of your locations, we most likely have auditors that are placed in those locations. So feel free to give us a call and kind of get a feel for what kind of services and what we can offer you. So here we have some of the standards that we're accredited to. These are the standards that we are allowed to certify companies to. Obviously, we have ISO 14001, and now with the changes in the standards, especially with ISO, kind of trying to bring everything in together so that any company can get certified and have an integrated system to a number of these different standards, such as 9001 or 18001. So when you're looking at certification, you may be ISO 9001 certified. To upgrade and get that ISO 14001 really shouldn't be take that much more, especially with the changes that they've made to this new version. So some of the benefits of getting certified, obviously with implementing an ISO 14001 system, we come in, we're not compliance auditors. We're not going to write you up for necessarily being not in compliance, but we do want to make sure you have a system in place to manage your legal and other requirements. So part of the benefit of getting certified is you're kind of forced to make sure that you've identified all those legal requirements and that you maintain compliance to those legal requirements. So you have management commitment and employee engagement. The more employees feel engaged, generally the more productive they are, and the happier they are to be there. So the management system kind of brings it all together and allows everybody to be engaged. Business management, notably for meeting stakeholder requirements, improving public image. Obviously, if you're certified to an international standard, it kind of raises the bar a little bit for your organization. Supplier environmental performance. Generally, if you are certified, that kind of flows down to your suppliers, and you put some requirements on them to help improve their environmental performance. Obviously, providing a competitive advantage. If you're certified to 14001 or one of the ISO standards over another company, oftentimes you'll have that competitive advantage. and then providing financial benefit. With a number of these standards, especially ISO 14001 or ISO 50001, which is your energy management standard, these standards often provide an opportunity for organizations to reduce costs, whether it's related to the chemicals that they're using or energy consumption that they're consuming at their facility. So some ISO 14001 drivers. Obviously, the commitment to environmental protection and conservation. This is one of the biggest drivers of an ISO 14001 standard. The whole purpose of getting certified is to reduce your environmental footprint. Try to find ways where you can, use more environmentally friendly products. So this new version really drives that home, especially with the requirement to look at the life cycle perspective, which we'll get into. Then we have the reduction of risk of adverse environmental impact, and then business management drivers included customer requirements and public image. So here's really where we're at with the standard. So the ISO 14001 2015 version was released on September 15th of this year. So it's out, it's ready to be used. Companies can now get certified to this version. So for companies that are already certified to the 2004 version, you'll have 3 years to transition. So that 3 years started on September 15th. So that means by September 14th of 2008, all companies who are currently certified to the 2004 version will have to upgrade. If you do not upgrade by that date, then your certificate basically becomes null and void. So a client can transition at any time during that 3-year period. Obviously, if you have a recertification that's coming up in the next couple of years, that probably makes more sense to do it at that recertification instead of waiting till the very end and doing it at potentially a surveillance audit. If you do it at a recertification audit, there's no additional time necessary to upgrade you to the new version. If you at a recertification, if you do it at a surveillance, there may, depending on the size of your facility, there may be a little bit of additional time. Obviously, that will involve a little additional cost. So if you're ready, I would try to plan to make sure that you can transition during that recertification audit. So during this transition period, an ISO 14001-2004 certificate is equivalent to the 2015 version. So whether you're certified to the old version, the new version, it's considered the same during that transition period. So in order to ensure that all the clients transition on time, PGR is requiring that all transition audits happen by May 1st of 2018. The reason why we have it a few months earlier is because there's always, it always takes time to close out that audit. So if there's nonconformances identified, you need time to address those and look into how you're going to correct those. And then your auditor needs to approve those. And then it has to go through the certification body who needs to approve the audit package and then issue your certificate. So all that takes time. So we want to make sure that you don't have a lapse in your certificate. So we want to make sure you have plenty of time to accomplish all that prior to that September 14th, 2018 deadline. So why was the standard revised? Obviously, the last version was 2004. It's been 11 years. That's an extremely long time for any standard not to be updated. So there's been significant changes in the formatting of it. Once you get into the content of the actual standard, you'll notice that these changes really aren't that drastic. It's really just a rewording in alignment with the ISO 9001 standard. Part of it is it's been made more general. There's not as many prescriptive requirements. It's intended to meet the need of any customer, any client, in any industry, anywhere in the world. So market relevance, they want it to be relevant to any company. So they want it to make it easy for any company to get certified. Compatibility, ISO 9001 is changing. They want to update ISO 14001 and eventually the other ISO standards to be in line with the ISO 9001 terminology, structure, and all that to make it easy for every company or any company to have an integrated management system. We have ease of use. Like I said, it kind of makes it more generic in some ways, so it's easier to understand and to implement and to get certified. Not that the requirements are any less, but they just make it easier to understand and put it more in layman's terms to help everybody understand the requirements. And we have topic coverage and flexibility, and then we get into technically sound basis. Again, easily understood, free trade. They want it so that any company in any country can meet the requirements of this. It doesn't tell you have to have specific requirements. You have to adhere to whatever the legal requirements are within your given country or state or area. Applicability of conformity. The market need for first, second, and third party conformity assessment. So it's easy. It's a set of guidelines that are easy to understand for auditors to go in there and hopefully be in conformity throughout the industry on how they go in and assess companies. And then exclusions. So it should not include directly related product, including services. So there's certain things that you could potentially exclude. For example, if you don't do design for 9001, you could potentially exclude that. If you share your facility with another company, you might be able to exclude part of the other operations, as long as your operations are kind of independent of the other ones. Okay, so here we have the Annex SL structure. So this is the new structure that all the ISO standards are going to have. So basically you have your 10 chapters. You start with the scope, which is the scope of the standard. You have your normative references, the terms and definitions, and then you get into the context of the organization. So the context of the organization down to improvement is really the core content of the standard. So that's where really you're getting audited to. So then you have leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement. Now, there really aren't any new clauses within this structure. It's just worded a little differently. The only one that's really new is the improvement, and that really just builds off of the continual improvement aspect. So not that it's new, they've just kind of pulled it out and made it its own chapter. So here you have the Annex SL common terms. So these are common terms across the ISO standards. So you'll see these in ISO 9001, 14001, and soon to be the new OSAS 18001, which they're calling ISO 45001, which I believe is due out the end of 2016 sometime. All right, so here's kind of the framework for the standards. So we have the PDCA model. PDCA model hasn't changed. We had the Plan, Do, Check, Act model in the old version. The new version looks similar, but you'll notice that in the center of that, it's not just a circle anymore. In the center of that, you have leadership. There's a much greater emphasis on leadership and top management being involved in every aspect of the management system to help drive it throughout the organization. So you'll see that one key thing is the internal and external issues going into it and the needs and expectations of interested parties going into it. The previous standard was largely focused inward on the company. You wanted to identify what your environmental aspects were, what your legal requirements were. It still includes that, but they want you to look out a little bit more. What are some of the requirements or needs of the external parties, neighbors, neighboring facilities? How can they impact you? How can you impact them? Nearby cities and towns. If you have large trucking system going in and out of the city, how is that affecting the city? How is that affecting noise pollution, air pollution, all that? So that needs to be looked into as well. So that all needs to go into that legal and other. And part of that legal and other is changed slightly, more so in how it's worded. The standard still requires legal and other requirements, but now they call it compliance obligations. So it hasn't really changed, they've just made it more generic. Because they want to make sure your compliance obligations include the external needs or interested party needs. So here we have what kind of an overview of the key changes in the standard. Obviously, as I mentioned, we have emphasis on leadership. This is kind of the driver now. It's not just we need to have a management representative who's going to enforce the standard, who's going to make sure that our company is in conformance to the requirements of this standard. Most companies will still have a management representative just because it makes it easier to have one person who can kind of monitor and manage certain aspects of it. But all top management and all managers of departments need to be aware of how the standard and how the requirements affect their department. So whether it's legal requirements, objectives, your environmental aspects, and the controls associated with those, how do those impact that department? So they need to be aware of that, and they need to drive that down to their employees instead of expecting the management representative to be the sole person to do that. So there's a focus on risk management. So instead of just saying, here's my environmental aspects, here's my legal requirements, they want you to look at what are my true risks. So that involves external and internal issues. That involves those environmental aspects that you do identify, your legal requirements. So it's similar, but they really want you to identify what some of those risks are. How can those affect not only our organization, how can those affect the external interested parties such as the neighboring facilities, the nearby towns and cities, even going into the end of life of the product. So they want you to look at the life cycle of that product. So what type of material are you putting into it, whether it's product or service or whatever it may be? Can you reduce some of that material or components that are going into it, take out the hazardous materials and put in some non-hazardous materials? If you have hazardous materials in that, what does that look like for the end of life of that product or service? What's going to happen with that hazardous material? How is it going to get disposed of? So you really need to look at the whole, from beginning to end of that product or service and how that impacts the environment. Emphasis on objectives, measurement, and change. So everybody always had objectives before. Now they're really pushing the objectives to be related to this risk management. Developing objectives for the different areas of your environmental management system. Now often we think of, even with environmental management systems, we think of processes. It's not really focused on processes, it's focused on what are your environmental risks. So, and then putting objectives in to help reduce those environmental risks to increase or improve your environmental performance. So you need to have objectives that will actually measure and that you can monitor to show improvement of your environmental performance. So it's not, the concept is similar to what it was, but it's a little bit more clear as to the direction we need to go. Then we get into communication and awareness. There's more requirements on the external communication, and then lastly we have fewer prescriptive requirements and make it more general so that you can make the management system fit your organization and not having to make your processes and your organization fit the management system. So here are some of the key terms, some of the newer terms. So the risk is an effect of uncertainty. So it's an effect is a deviation from the expected. It can be positive or negative. So when we get into the standard, we'll see risks and opportunities quite a bit. So these are potential adverse effects or threats and potential beneficial effects or opportunities. So when you're looking at these risks and opportunity, you want to identify which one of these are the negative, the threats, and which one of these are the positive or opportunities that you can improve upon. So threats, you're going to put controls in place to help reduce that threat and minimize that threat. Opportunities could be replacing, one type of chemical for a non-hazardous type of product or material. So you're finding opportunities to reduce the environmental pollution. Where threats, you may not be able to improve upon it, but at least you can try to reduce it. Then we have life cycle, consecutive and interlinked stages of a product or services system, from raw material acquisition or generation from natural resources to final disposal. So you're looking at the life cycle of that product or service. What goes into it, how until it's going to get disposed. So that includes from suppliers of raw material to the manufacturing process to the consumption or usage process by your end user, and then finally how they're going to dispose of that. So all that needs to be taken into consideration. Obviously, there's certain things that you can't change, and those may be the threats that you identify, and then the things that you may be able to improve upon, maybe not immediately, but down the road, those are opportunities. And here we have environmental performance. This is the kind of the key term for this new standard. This is what it's all about. How are you going to improve your environmental performance? So it's performance related to the management of environmental aspects. You've identified your environmental aspects and your risks and opportunities and all that. How are you going to improve that? And one of the key ways, obviously, is establishing objectives, true environmental objectives that'll help improve your environmental performance. So here's kind of a more descriptive information on some of the changes to ISO 14001. We went through a lot of these, so I'm not going to go into great detail again, but one of the big questions that I always get at the end is the presentation available after the webinar? And absolutely, you can download it with the audio from our website, or if you just want a copy of the PowerPoint slides, let me know. I'll be able to send that to you, but so you can go through this later on and read in more detail what it's saying here. But we have strategic environmental management, leadership, which we talked about, protecting the environment. So this is prevention of pollution, sustainable resource use, climate change mitigation and adaptation, protection of biodiversity and ecosystems. So all this goes into your environmental. If you're adding on to your facility, is it going to disrupt an ecosystem, or what kind of impact can it have on the environment? It's not just chemical pollution or in the groundwater or air pollution. You're looking at all these different things. Obviously, you have energy consumption and natural resource consumption. So all of these need to go into that planning portion of your management system in that plan, do, check, act model. So make sure that you identify all the potential issues that you may encounter that may be involved in your operations. Again, we have environmental performance, which we discussed, and life cycle thinking. So with environmental performance, there's always the management standards were always based on continual improvement. That's still there, but it really has shifted from just a continual improvement of your management system to showing continual improvement of your environmental performance. I mean, that's really what the standard and the purpose of the standard is all about, improving your environmental performance, not just improving your management system and creating new documents or adding more objectives that really aren't going to impact anything. I mean, they want to show that you've really put in the effort to improve that environmental performance. Communication, again, there's more emphasis on the external communication. The old standard had, basically had a comment in there, and part of it was whether or not you're going to communicate externally. And then in certain requirements, you could say yes or no. You don't really have that option anymore. You're required to communicate externally about your management system to your interested parties. Documentation, you'll notice as you go through the standard, there's really no, you shall have this procedure, this procedure. It'll say you need documented information. That can be whatever works best for you, especially with everything going electronic now. If it's a procedure, a form, whatever it may be, as long as you meet that documented information, a lot of times you're still going to have procedures, you're still going to have your manual. Not all that specifically required, but it just makes it easier to maintain. But they just kind of leave it open to companies to decide what works best for them. So here we get into the standard, the chapter requirements. It's kind of a brief overview of each chapter. and then we'll get into the certification aspect. So Chapter 4, like I said before, this is really where the core requirements of the standard start, and this is where you'll get audited against. So we talk about context of organization. So this chapter really addresses the objectives of companies, giving more consideration to the external issues and impacts in their environmental management system. Again, I keep saying external, because they want you to look outside of your organization as well, not just focus on what's going on inside. The needs and expectations of interested parties are to be better understood and evaluated as to whether they give rise to specific requirements. So if these specific requirements are identified, they're going to go into that compliance obligation section, which used to be the legal and other requirements. So obviously that falls under the other. That terminology, legal and other, still applies, but the preferred term now is compliance obligation. So you can still use either one. Chapter 5 is the leadership. So top management should, among other things, take on more responsibility for the effectiveness of the management system. So as I said before, top management needs to understand what their objectives are related to their department, what their legal requirements are, what procedures apply, what, every aspect of that management system that applies to their organization. They need to be aware of that now, and they need to be the drivers of that, not the management representative. So then we get into the environmental policy. So this should include a commitment to protect the environment beyond the corporate boundaries. So this gets into that life cycle thinking, from the suppliers, from that raw material. Are you using virgin raw material? Are you using recycled raw material? Is it hazardous, non-hazardous? Then you get into the manufacturing. What type of manufacturing processes do you have? Can you reduce the environmental impact of that manufacturing using more energy efficient equipment potentially? And then you get into potentially transportation of your product. How are you transporting that? Are you shipping partial shipments, or are you making sure you ship, full shipments to help reduce the environmental impact? So these are all things you need to think about. And then finally, the end-of-life disposal of that. So as I stated also, a management representative is no longer explicitly required. You will most likely still have one, but you don't necessarily have to have one person responsible for everything anymore. Chapter 6, this is where you get in really to that planning portion of the Plan, Do, Check, Act model. Chapter 4 and 5 really just set up, how you're going to start planning the management system. So once you get into 6, it talks about, you're going to be identifying those environmental aspects and the impacts of those activities that you're doing. Products and services are going to be taken into account more strongly, looking at that life cycle perspective. You're going to be developing those objectives still. So there's not a lot that really has changed in the planning, other than you need to start looking outside of the facility. So within the planning process, we talk about risks and opportunities. So determining the risks and opportunities as it relates to your environmental aspects, your compliance obligation, and any other issues and requirements that you've identified. So these are where your risks and opportunities are going to come from. Environmental objectives. So your objectives really need to take into account your significant environmental aspects and your compliance obligations. The whole point of identifying what those significant environmental aspects are, is so you can hopefully identify opportunities to help reduce those significant environmental aspects. So if you've identified 2 or 3 environmental or significant environmental aspects, but your objectives and targets are related to other environmental aspects, that's not really meeting the purpose of the standards. You really want to address and try to reduce those significant ones. In Chapter 7, this is the support. This is where we get into the training and resources and awareness. So Chapter 7 talks about commitment to environmental protection, is to give more consideration in terms of communications as well. So external representation and reporting must be regulated. So if you have legal requirements and you have reporting requirements, you need to have controls around that. You need to be able to demonstrate that you've been meeting those requirements. So with respects to documents and records, only the term documented information again is being used. So this can take the form of anything that you want it to, but you have to be able to show, when it says documented information, how you are meeting that requirement. Chapter 8, operation. A lot of the Chapter 7, you'll notice, is really just a rewording of the requirements. There's really not a lot that's changed there. They take out the awareness requirement and kind of pull it into its own subclause. So there's not that they've taken anything out or changed much. They've just restructured it so it looks different. Operation really hasn't changed much either. You're going to have your procedures or controls or documented information in place to make sure that you've identified how you're going to control your operation at your facility, and external as well. So the operational scheduling and control should pay closer attention to the upstream and downstream, and in particular outsourced processes, making sure that you have controls around any outsourced processes. If someone's doing painting, what type of paint are they using? What type of area mission controls do they have in place? You need to make sure you're aware of this, and you're making sure that they meet the outsourced company meets your requirements for environmental performance. So this also includes the environmental impacts of products and services right through to the end of their utilization. So consistent with a life cycle perspective, and this is taken from the standard, the organization shall establish controls to ensure that its environmental requirements are addressed in the design and development process. So if you are responsible, your organization controls the design and development of the product or service or whatever you're offering, you need to make sure that that life cycle perspective is taken into account. So you need to be able to demonstrate that. If an auditor comes on site, they want to know that you've considered the type of material that goes into that product or service. So determine its environmental requirements for the procurement of products and services as appropriate. Communicate its relevant environmental requirements to external providers, including contractors. You have contractors that come on site, make sure that they're aware of what your requirements are, if they can have a potential impact on that life cycle or on your product or service. Consider the need to provide information about potential significant environmental impacts associated with the transportation or delivery, use, end-of-life treatment, and final disposal of its products and services. So as you'll notice, as you go through, a lot of the requirements haven't significantly changed. It's just a little bit different way of thinking. So you may need to expand your management system a little bit and make it extend outward to meet these requirements of these external issues. In Chapter 9, we get into the performance evaluation. So based on the extended environmental assessment, expectations for environmental performance evaluations are now also being raised. So this includes performance of environmental objectives, and monitoring and measuring will also include all other corporate commitments and risks in relation to its environmental performance. So with the performance evaluation, as I said, they've made this its own chapter. This is the driver. This is kind of what it's all about. So how are you going to show improvement in your environmental performance? So the way to do that is to evaluate your performance through internal audits, compliance evaluations, and monitoring of your objectives and targets. So there's a number of different ways. A lot of these ways haven't changed from the previous version, but it's just a different way of looking at it again. And then lastly, we have the improvement section. So the correction of nonconformities as well as the continual improvement process will now be focusing more on the organization surrounding and the improvement of environmental performance. So the new 2015 version requires that you show improvement in your environmental performance. So a lot of people ask, well, what if we don't meet our objectives or we don't show continual improvement? If you have objectives in place and you're striving to show that you're improving your environmental performance, it may not happen all at once. You may not meet every single objective every single time. The key thing to make sure that you do, though, is identify why you did not meet that objective. So you can modify that objective or change that objective so that you can improve your environmental performance. You can't just not meet an objective and say, oh, well, we didn't meet it this time. Better luck next time. You need to actually identify kind of the root cause of why you didn't meet that objective, so that way you can work on continually improving that environmental performance. So that's kind of the higher level overview of the standard and some of the key changes that are in the standard. So hopefully that portion was helpful, just to kind of set your mind at ease and realize that it's really not as difficult, or that it shouldn't be that much additional work to achieve the 2015 version. But obviously, if you have specific requirements, feel free to contact me and we can kind of work through those. Obviously, I'm not allowed to consult, but we can help clarify some of the requirements of the standard and put you in the right direction. So also within the standard, you have Annex A, which is a guidance document basically that goes through the clauses of the standard and the chapters of the standards and helps to clarify what the requirements are. So that's a good tool to use as well. And also when you're looking at the old version, trying to compare it to the new version, if you go to Annex B, they have a matrix there which breaks down the requirements in the old version to the new version and aligns, kind of shows you where the clauses match up, so that you can hopefully have an easier time identifying some of the gaps that you need to address to upgrade to the new version. And then lastly is the bibliography in the end of the standard that kind of goes over some of the, obviously the documents that went into creating this, but also some of the other core environmental 14,000 documents that are applicable. Okay, so for those of you who are not certified, here's the certification process. So you have basically 18 months. If you want to get certified to the 2004 version, you have 18 months from the September 15th publication date to still get certified to the 2004 version. After that 18 months, every new certificate has to go to the 2015 version. So, but if you go to the old version within the 18 months, you still then have to transition and upgrade within that 3-year time period. So if you're in the process and you already have everything established and you're ready to go, it may make sense to get the 2004 version now. But if you're going to wait a year, then it may be more beneficial just to do the 2015 version instead of having to obviously create the 2004 documents and management system just to upgrade it within a year or two. So the certification steps, first thing you're going to do is establish your documentation. You're going to do that planning portion of the PDCA cycle for your management system. Once you've planned it, you have the documents in place, you have the structure in place, you're going to then train everybody. You're going to make sure everybody's competent in the requirements of the standard and understand their role in improving and conforming to the management system. Once that portion is done, you're going to implement it. This is the do portion. So you're going to implement all those 14,001 requirements. And then once you've implemented it for a while, you're going to check it. So you're at the check portion of that PDCA. You're going to make sure that your system's working effectively, it's implemented effectively. You're going to try to identify any gaps or nonconformances through internal audits, compliance evaluations, by reviewing your objectives and targets, any monitoring and measuring that you've done on site, and then all that's going to go into that management review. So that's kind of the final review to see, yes, we're effective in this area, but we need a little bit more work in this area. And then you put that back into the planning process and you continue that cycle. So once you've basically completed one cycle of that, you're ready for your certification audit. So obviously you can contract with a certification body during that period, but we cannot certify a company until you've completed that cycle, basically. So once you're done with that cycle, we'll go in and we'll conduct what we call a stage 1 and a stage 2 audit. So stage 1 audit is really just a documentation review. We're going to go on site, we're going to look around, make sure that your documents and your procedures, everything that you have matches up with what you're doing on site. So once you're ready to go, your documents are good, your procedures are good, we'll approve you to go to the stage 2. And this is really going in and auditing the implementation of your management system. So once we complete the stage 2, if there's any nonconformities that were identified, you'll have to address those. We'll close those out, and then you're approved for certification. So that's kind of the initial certification process. So here again, we have the transition process. We talked about the 18 months, which I've already addressed. So here's kind of a more in-depth breakdown of the stage 1 and stage 2. And the time frame, stage 2s usually occur about 30 to 45 days after that stage 1 audit. So the certification process for ISO 14001 is the same as it is for ISO 9001 or OSAS 18001 and the rest of the ISO standards. So if you're certified to say 9001, you're familiar with that certification process, it's going to be the same for 14001. So once you complete your initial certification audit, you are issued a certificate that's good for 3 years. So during that 3 years, though, you're going to have a couple audits. You're going to have what we call surveillance audits. Now, these can occur at either 6 months or 12-month intervals. If it's 6 months, generally 2 6-month audits within a year make up one surveillance audit. And really, that's dependent on you and your comfort level. A lot of times, if a company has annual surveillance audits, sometimes the implementation of it slips a little bit. They're not paying as close attention to it, but if you have it every 6 months, you tend to pay a little closer attention to make sure you're staying on top of everything. Really, whatever your comfort level is, you can choose to do that. So you'll have, if you do the annual, you'll have 2 annual surveillance audits, and then after those 2 audits, in the 3rd year, you'll have a recertification audit. So your surveillance audits are partial system audits. We're looking at areas of previous nonconformities and kind of some of the core areas of your management system. During that recertification audit, we're going back and auditing everything. We're going through your whole management system again. And once that audit is complete, any issues are identified, addressed, approved, you're issued a certificate for another 3 years. And that certification process is just a cycle that continues every 3 years. So that is the presentation for today. I hope that was useful and beneficial and kind of hopefully set your mind at ease a little bit. As you start going through the requirements, the specific requirements of the new 2015 version, I think you'll realize that, for the most part, the requirements haven't changed that drastically. There's a few new terms here and there and a few new requirements here and there, and it branches out a little bit more to the external, but the core of it is still the same. So here's my contact information. If you have questions, comments, concerns, you want to know when the best time to transition or upgrade is, reach out to me. We can discuss it and figure out what works best for your company. If you have, requirement-specific questions on the standard, shoot me an email, give me a call. We can discuss that as well. So if you have any questions, type them into the question box, and we'll go through those for a few minutes here. Looks like we have about 15 minutes left. So if you want a copy of the presentation, again, it'll be up on the pgr.com website. You can go there, and within a few days, and it'll be up there. If you want just the presentation, you want it sooner, shoot me an email so I have your email and I can send it to you. All right, here's another question. We are not 14001, but are 9001 certified. Should we have a separate program for the 14001, or would you recommend a standalone 14001 documented program with the change in structure of the 2015 revision? If you're 9001 and you're looking to get 14001, it really depends on how quickly you're going to transfer to the 9001 and how soon you're going to be ready for 14001. If you're currently developing the 14001, it would probably make sense to revise the 9001 at the same time, combine the two. Because if you can have an integrated system, a lot of these procedures and documents and requirements are going to flow together. Your internal audits, management reviews, objectives and targets, and a number of other things, policies. You can combine all of these into one thing to make everybody's life a lot easier, so you don't have, you know, basically duplicated documents all over the facility. If you can streamline and have one integrated management system, that's usually the best approach, and it's also the most cost-effective from an auditing standpoint. So look at where you are with your 9001 program. Look at how quickly you want to get 14001. If you don't plan on transitioning until 2 or 3 years, then you may want to get certified to the 14001 2004 version, and then upgrade them both at the same time. But again, that's up to you. If you have more questions, we can talk about it. How does PGR view Annex A? So this is always kind of a tricky topic. So where Annex A goes into more detail are those specific requirements expected to be included in a system, or is Annex A just seen as guidance? Annex A is just seen as guidance. We can never audit to a guidance document. We audit to the standard. So the guidance document is meant just to help you understand what some of the requirements are trying to say. So it may say you should do this or should do that. We can't audit the shoulds. We can only audit the shalls that are in the standard. All right, next question here. All right, next question. Would you recommend staying with the 2004 revision or focus on the 2015 revision? If you're not certified yet and you're still in the planning stages, you're still developing your documents and procedures, I think you're better off just going to the 2015 version. That way you're going to have to transition eventually anyway, so why not start preparing your documents to meet that? That way it's less work for you down the road, it's less of a transition process, and really I don't think the requirements are that drastically different, so I don't think it should be that much more work to implement the new version. To me, that would probably make more sense and be more efficient for a company if they're still in the planning processes of that. Next question, does PGR conduct integrated audits with respect to ISO 9000, 14000, 18000? Absolutely. So if you have a truly integrated management system, you have all those core processes of the management system integrated, like I said, management reviews, internal audits, objective targets, potentially training and other things. If you have one system, yes, we'll do one audit basically for all 3 of those standards, or for however many integrated standards you have. We'll send an auditor there who's a lead auditor for all of those standards, so they can go and audit you in one shot, so you're having reduced audit times, because we can provide more discounts when it's an integrated system. So your overall audit time's less, your costs are less, and it's generally more effective and efficient to do it that way. All right, next question. Lifecycle perspective is understandable for materials products, but how does it apply to a service company? Depends on the type of service you're providing. Let's say you're more of a maintenance or janitorial type service company. What type of products are you using? How are you disposing of those products? If you're using cleaning products, or you maintenance, or you're using oils, what are you doing with those oils when you're done with them? What are you doing? What type of oils are you using to begin with? So it really depends on the service that you're providing. Generally, if it's a service, it's what type of product are you using, or if you're offering, engineering services, what type of when you're doing your designs, are you looking at more environmentally friendly material? Are you looking at energy efficient equipment and technology? So there's a lot of different ways that the lifecycle perspective can apply. Really depends on the type of service or product materials that your company is involved with. All right, what is the difference between the planning actions as mentioned in 614 and those on 622, planning actions to achieve environmental objectives? It is kind of repetition. It's really just I'd have to go in and look at the exact requirement in the standard, but I think 614 is really kind of coming up with some of those planning items. 622 is more the implementation of how you're going to develop and establish and implement those objectives. All right, let's see what else we have. PGR does not offer the standard for purchase. If you go to the ISO website, though, I believe it's iso.org, you can purchase it directly from them. We're not allowed to sell it. We don't have that license for that. So, but you can go to that website. If you can't find it, shoot me an email and I'll help you get it. All right, next one. How does PGR determine how many sites to audit if corporate issued directives to all operating units to third-party certified to ISO? If you have multiple sites, multiple sites fall under two categories generally. Either multi-site, which means that for the most part every site is doing almost identical processes. A campus is the other option. If you have multiple facilities that are all doing different tasks, but basically all of them combined make up one process, that's a campus. So if it's a campus, every site is seen every audit because they're all different. If it's a multi-site, it's based on guidance. So we basically do a sampling of a certain percentage of the number of sites. So it really depends on how many sites you have that determines how many sites will be seen during that audit. And it's different for initial audit versus surveillance audit and recertification audit. So if you were to contact us, we could basically calculate how many sites would need to be seen. All right, well, that's all the questions I see so far. I'll hold out for a few more questions if you have any. Otherwise, again, feel free to shoot me an email, give me a call. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. But I'm not seeing any other questions come up. So I appreciate everybody's time today. I hope it was beneficial. And keep an eye out on our website. If you haven't signed up, you can sign up for additional webinars and just updated information from time to time. We have newsletters that go out that you can sign up for to kind of stay abreast of what's going on in the industry. So again, I appreciate everybody's time. Hope you enjoy this beautiful day, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you.